May God bless each of you, our cherished family, loyal subscribers, and readers. May He fill your hearts with love, joy, and peace. I pray your days shine brightly, your burdens lighten, and your dreams come true. May He guide us as a family united by stories and emotions, giving us strength. Amen. My dear family, how did our last story touch your heart? Share your thoughts in the comments. I truly appreciate them. I've noticed our views are dropping, and I sincerely ask, if these stories have brought you comfort or inspiration, please invite your loved ones to join us. Together, we can create a community that uplifts and spreads love through every word. You are not just subscribers, but family. Your presence here is precious to me. Let's continue this journey together. London, a magnificent city where everything moves ceaselessly, from the grand skyscrapers to the bustling rhythm of life. Amidst this vibrant metropolis, Knight Medical Group, a private hospital, stands as a symbol of modern medicine, bringing together the most talented doctors and cutting-edge technology in Europe. Among the hospital's top-tier medical staff is Elise Carter, a young yet highly skilled surgeon with an unwavering spirit. Elise possesses striking blue eyes filled with determination and wavy brown hair that is always neatly tucked beneath her white coat. Born into a middle-class family in the suburbs of London, she had to work twice as hard as others to secure her place in one of the city's most prestigious hospitals. Elise is not only known for her exceptional surgical skills, but also for her steadfast principles and disciplined lifestyle. She prioritizes her career above all else, believing that success is the result of relentless effort rather than compromise or dependence on others. To Elise, life is a series of challenges to conquer, and she is willing to forgo all temptations, including love, to achieve her dreams. But not everyone shares her perspective, especially Michael Knight, the man she despises the most, who also happens to be the owner of the entire hospital network she works for. Michael Knight is a powerful name in both the finance and healthcare industries. He inherited the Knight empire after his father's sudden passing and quickly elevated it to new heights with his sharp strategies and keen business acumen. People say Michael is a wolf in the business world, cold, ruthless, and always prioritizing profit above all else. To him, the hospital is a business, and like any business, it must operate in the most efficient way to maximize profit. Elise and Michael have never been able to see eye to eye. From the very first day Elise joined the hospital, she clashed with Michael in meetings. She fought to ensure that patient care was the top priority, while Michael demanded cost-cutting measures to optimize profitability. "Patients are not just numbers in your financial reports, Mr. Knight," Elise once declared, her gaze sharp during a critical meeting. Michael merely smirked, his amber eyes gleaming with challenge. "And you should remember, Dr. Carter, that this hospital cannot function without money." These heated exchanges became a regular occurrence, with neither side willing to back down. Elise saw Michael as an emotionless, money-driven tyrant who manipulated everything without appreciating the dedication of the medical team. As for Michael, although he often challenged Elise in their professional debates, he couldn't deny that she was one of the best doctors the hospital had ever seen. However, what irked him the most was her unwavering persistence and blunt honesty, qualities he found both frustrating and strangely intriguing. "You can't change reality, Elise. This hospital needs tough decisions. And I believe patients deserve the best care, not just financial calculations," she retorted without hesitation. They openly despised each other. Michael always maintained an indifferent and mocking demeanor whenever Elise was around, while she constantly sought to prove him wrong. But what neither of them dared to admit was the undeniable attraction simmering beneath their fierce clashes. There were fleeting moments when their gazes locked during meetings, a subtle tension that neither of them wanted to acknowledge. Despite trying to deny it, Elise couldn't ignore the fact that Michael was an incredibly attractive man, with his tall, commanding presence, chiseled features, and that infuriatingly confident demeanor. Meanwhile, Michael, despite his outward indifference, found himself captivated by the way Elise's face flushed with anger whenever they argued. However, both were far too stubborn to admit that there was anything between them beyond animosity. Deep down, Elise constantly reminded herself that Michael represented everything she could never accept. A man obsessed with power and financial gain. On the other hand, Michael, though impressed by Elise, couldn't forget that she was the only one who dared to challenge him without fear. Their conflicts and tensions continued to escalate, becoming more intense with each passing day. Neither was willing to yield, and neither was ready to acknowledge that something more than hatred existed between them. But everything would change. Fate, with its ironic sense of humor, was about to set the stage for one fateful night, where all boundaries would blur and pride and hatred would be drowned in an irresistible wave of impulse and passion. A single night could change everything, transforming them from enemies to two people entangled in an unexpected relationship. And when that moment arrived, Elise Carter would have to face the truth she had been avoiding all along. The fact that not everything in life could be controlled, not even her own heart. Paris in autumn is like an oil painting, with golden lights stretching along the ancient streets and the Seine River shimmering under the twilight. Tonight, at the luxurious five-star hotel, Le Grand Lumiere, Knight Medical Group is hosting a grand gala to celebrate its 20th anniversary, gathering the entire leadership team, medical staff, and special guests. Elise Carter, dressed in an elegant deep blue evening gown, stood quietly in a corner of the room, gripping a glass of red wine tightly. She had no desire to be here, but under pressure from her colleagues and superiors, she had no choice but to attend. Events like these were not her preference. She despised the extravagance, the superficial small talk, and most of all, she hated seeing Michael Knight, the man she had always considered her arch nemesis. Her gaze swept across the room to where Michael stood, surrounded by a group of investors, wearing his signature, charming yet distant smile. He was always like that, tall, impeccably handsome in his perfect tuxedo, exuding an aura of power that made it hard for anyone to look away. Elise sighed softly, determined to keep her distance from him throughout the night, but fate, it seemed, had other plans. Elise moved toward the bar, hoping to find a quiet corner to escape the endless chatter. But just as she ordered a glass of wine, a familiar voice sounded behind her. "I didn't think you were the type to frequent places like this, Dr. Carter." Elise turned around to find Michael leaning casually against the bar, a glass of whiskey in hand, his eyes filled with amusement. She smirked, her voice cool and composed. "Trust me, I don't want to be here either. But sometimes people don't have a choice, do they?" Michael chuckled lightly, his sharp gaze lingering on her with a touch of intrigue. "You're always so rigid. Have you ever considered letting go and enjoying yourself for once?" Elise tightened her grip on the glass, irritation rising within her. "Enjoy? At an event like this?" She scoffed. "I think you're the one who knows how to pretend to enjoy yourself while all you really care about are the numbers in your financial reports." Michael raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing on his lips. "And you, as always, enjoy arguing over unnecessary things. Perhaps that's why you never truly enjoy anything in life, Elise." Elise gritted her teeth, her eyes flashing with defiance. The alcohol coursing through her veins began to heighten her emotions, making it harder to keep them in check. "You know nothing about me, Michael." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a low, provocative tone. "I know enough to see that you're hiding something. You hate me, don't you? Yet you always seem to seek me out, constantly challenging me. Why is that?" Elise felt her heart skip a beat for a fleeting moment, but she quickly lifted her chin, determined not to let her voice waver. "Because I can't accept the fact that you see patients as mere numbers." Michael chuckled softly, his gaze softening slightly but still filled with that ever-present challenge. "Perhaps, or perhaps you're just looking for an excuse to keep thinking about me." A surge of frustration flared within Elise. She slammed her glass down on the bar, her eyes blazing with determination. "You can think whatever you want, Michael, but don't ever assume that I care about you." And with a burst of impulsive defiance she couldn't explain, Elise lifted her glass and downed the entire drink in one go, as if daring herself to prove something. Michael watched her, amusement flickering in his eyes, mingled with something deeper, something he himself wasn't sure how to define. Under the dim hotel lights, Elise felt everything around her blur, leaving only Michael standing there, closer than she had anticipated. His warm breath brushed against her skin as he leaned down, his deep voice resonating in the space between them. "Careful, Elise. You don't want to do something you'll regret." Elise let out a soft, defiant chuckle, her eyes glinting with challenge. But even she hadn't anticipated how a little alcohol could push things beyond control. A second later, she felt Michael's warmth, his hand gently resting on her waist, and she didn't resist. Her heart pounded erratically, and though her rational mind screamed for her to stop, the overwhelming emotions were too strong. They were drawn to each other, and before she knew it, Elise had allowed herself to fall into the arms of the man she despised the most. The Parisian night seemed endless, and in the lavish suite on the top floor of the hotel, Elise had broken the principles she had steadfastly upheld for so long. The piercing sound of an alarm clock shattered the tranquility of the luxurious hotel room. Soft morning light filtered through the curtains, casting gentle patterns across the silk sheets and the curled-up figure in bed. Elise stirred slightly, her head pounding as if she had just endured a nightmare. Her eyelids felt heavy, but when she finally opened them, the first thing she saw was a broad, muscular shoulder and the warmth of a body pressed close to hers. "What the hell?" Elise murmured, her heart racing as the horrifying truth dawned on her. She pushed the blanket aside and bolted upright, her wide eyes filled with shock as she stared at the man lying beside her. Michael Knight, still fast asleep, his face calm and composed as if nothing had happened. "Damn it!" Elise's panicked scream jolted Michael awake. He frowned slightly before slowly opening his eyes, his amber gaze filled with amusement. "Good morning, Dr. Carter," he greeted, his voice husky with sleep, a teasing smirk tugging at his lips. Elise instinctively pulled the blanket around her bare body, her voice trembling. What happened?" Michael sat up, leaning against the headboard with effortless ease, his arms crossed over his chest. He looked completely relaxed, a stark contrast to Elise's visible panic. "You don't remember?" He arched an eyebrow, his tone laced with mockery. "I must say, last night was impressive." Elise felt heat rise to her cheeks, anger bubbling up inside her. "No! No way! We didn't! We couldn't have!" She stammered, clutching the sheets tightly, her eyes darting around in search of an escape. Michael shrugged, amusement dancing in his eyes. "I'm afraid it did happen, whether you want to believe it or not." Elise clenched her fists, trying to suppress the rising panic. She couldn't believe she had lost control with the one man she loathed with every fiber of her being. "Listen, Michael, this was a mistake. I don't want any strings attached to you." Her voice wavered but remained firm. Michael's eyes darkened momentarily, a fleeting shadow of something she couldn't quite place. Was it hurt? But it disappeared almost instantly, replaced by his signature cool demeanor. "A mistake," he echoed, stepping closer, his intense gaze locking onto hers. "You really think I'm going to let this slide as if nothing happened?" Elise met his stare with defiance, her voice unwavering. "Exactly. I don't need you to take responsibility for anything." A brief flicker of something, disappointment, flashed in Michael's eyes, but he masked it with a faint smile. "Elise," he said, his voice dropping to a softer tone, "I'm not the kind of man who walks away after a night like this." Elise crossed her arms over her chest, her gaze sharp. "And I'm not the kind of woman who clings to someone over a single mistake." Michael paused for a long moment, studying her with an unreadable expression before letting out a slow sigh. He ran a hand through his tousled hair, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "So what do you want, Elise? To pretend this never happened? To act as if we didn't just spend the entire night together?" Elise bit her lip hard, almost drawing blood. She knew the only thing she could do now was escape. From him. From this. From everything. "Exactly." She nodded firmly before hurriedly gathering her clothes, fumbling to put them on. Michael didn't stop her. He simply stood there, watching her every move, as if etching the moment into his memory. As Elise reached the door, she paused for a fleeting moment, glancing back at him. "We will never speak of this again," she declared coldly, her voice resolute. Michael stood with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable, but the familiar smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. You really think so, Elise? He murmured, watching as the door clicked shut behind her. With a sigh, he reached for his phone on the nightstand and looked at an unsent message from the previous night, a short text that read, You're far more intriguing than I thought, Doctor. Carter. He smirked to himself before deleting it. We'll meet again soon. Elise Carter walked briskly down the long corridor of Knight Medical Group Hospital, her high heels clicking rhythmically against the marble floor. Yet inside, her heart was a chaotic mess she could no longer control. It had been 3 days since she left the hotel in Paris, but the image of Michael Knight clung to her like an unrelenting nightmare. She had given her first time to the man she despised the most, an arrogant, insufferable man, and the thought of it made Elise feel humiliated to the point where she couldn't even look at herself in the mirror. I have to forget it. It never happened. She repeated those words in her mind like a mantra, but logic and emotions never seemed to align. Elise refused to let herself dwell on Michael. She had meticulously planned to avoid him at all costs. Since returning to London, she had rearranged her schedule to skip meetings with him, avoided areas where they might cross paths, and even changed her lunch hours to ensure she wouldn't have to face him. But it seemed fate had other ideas. On Monday morning, Elise stepped into the boardroom, feeling more tense than usual. She chose the farthest seat possible, burying her face in documents, hoping to remain unnoticed. But destiny, as always, had its own cruel sense of humor. Within minutes, Michael Knight entered the room with his usual composed demeanor, but his eyes instantly found hers. Dr. Carter, I didn't think you were the forgetful type. Elise froze, her heart hammering as Michael stood beside her, a smirk playing on his lips. Or did I leave too much of an impression that night? He continued, his voice deliberately slow, savoring every syllable, as if he were relishing her discomfort. A hot flush crept up Elise's cheeks, her icy gaze meeting his, though her mind was a whirlwind of panic. She forced herself to stay calm, subtly glancing around to ensure no one else sensed the tension brewing between them. That has nothing to do with work. Don't bring it up, she whispered, gripping her pen tightly to steady herself. Michael leaned in slightly, close enough for her to catch his intoxicating scent, one she desperately wished to forget. His amber eyes sparkled with amusement. I don't think you can forget, Dr. Carter, but if you'd like, I could help you remember, he mused, his voice silky, yet laced with mischief. Elise clenched her teeth, her sharp glare meeting his unwavering gaze. But Michael simply chuckled and casually took his seat, as if their conversation had been about nothing more than the weather. Throughout the remainder of the meeting, Elise struggled to concentrate. Michael's teasing words echoed in her mind, making it nearly impossible to focus on the data in front of her. She felt suffocated by his presence, by the way his mere proximity unraveled her carefully constructed composure. As soon as the meeting ended, Elise rushed out of the boardroom, as if escaping from something far more dangerous than work discussions. She only wanted to get away from Michael as fast as possible, but fate, once again, was not on her side. At the turn of the hallway, that deep, familiar voice struck her like a lightning bolt. I still remember that night, Elise. Do you? She froze, her fingers instinctively tightening around the clipboard she was holding. Slowly turning around, she found Michael leaning casually against the wall, arms crossed, with that maddeningly smug half-smile. Elise took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain composed. It was the biggest mistake of my life, Michael. Michael tilted his head slightly, amusement flickering in his gaze. A mistake, he echoed. I prefer to think of it as the most exciting thing you've ever done. His words dripped with sarcasm, his lips curving into that infuriating smirk. Elise's blood boiled. She had to resist the overwhelming urge to slap him across the face. I told you, don't bring it up, she snapped, her voice strained with suppressed anger. Michael took a step closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper, his breath brushing against her ear. Are you sure you want to forget? Because I don't. Elise's frustration reached its peak, and she bit down on her lip hard to stop herself from exploding. Taking a deep breath, she turned on her heel and walked away swiftly, refusing to look back. Michael remained where he was, watching her retreat with a glint of amusement and intrigue in his eyes. "Run all you want, Elise," he murmured under his breath, his smirk deepening. "But we both know this isn't over." Elise soon realized that avoiding Michael was impossible. He seemed to appear everywhere she least expected, at the hospital cafe, in board meetings, and even outside her clinic area. One morning, while Elise was busy reviewing patient files, a gentle knock on the glass door of her office startled her. "Should I schedule an appointment, doctor?" "Carter?" Michael's voice was serious, but his eyes twinkled with mischief. Elise shot him a glare. "I think you should get your head examined, Michael." Michael chuckled, his deep, velvety laughter filling the space between them. "I've noticed you've been rather tense lately. I'm genuinely concerned." Elise sighed, waving him away dismissively. "If you have no medical reason to be here, I might have to call security." Michael raised an eyebrow, clearly in no hurry to leave. "Are you really that determined to avoid me, Elise?" he whispered, his gaze lingering meaningfully. Elise turned away, refusing to answer. Every encounter with Michael sent Elise's heart into an erratic rhythm that she found terrifying. No matter how hard she tried to act indifferent, his presence left her flustered and more vulnerable than she cared to admit. She swore to herself that she would never fall into that emotional trap again. But Michael Knight was not the kind of man who gave up easily. She reminded herself that she was a professional, and she wouldn't let a single mistake jeopardize her career or her carefully structured life. But the hardest part was that every time she saw Michael, memories of that night in Paris flooded back, making it nearly impossible to keep her composure. No matter how much she loathed him, Elise couldn't deny one undeniable truth. There was something between them, something inexplicable. And that frightened her more than anything else. One misty London morning, just as Elise stepped into the hospital lobby, her phone buzzed with a text from a familiar number she thought she had buried in the past. "Guess who just got back to town?" Elise froze, her eyes widening for a split second before a small smile tugged at her lips. No one else but Daniel Collins, her best friend from university. They had once been inseparable, but when Daniel moved to the U.S. to pursue a specialization in cardiology, they had gradually lost touch, and now he was back. Less than an hour later, Elise walked into their favorite cafe near the hospital. As soon as the door swung open, she spotted a tall figure with neatly styled brown hair, warm eyes, and a familiar, gentle smile. "Elise!" Daniel stood up and embraced her warmly, the kind of hug that felt like coming home. "I can't believe you haven't changed at all." Elise laughed, the stress of her hectic days momentarily melting away. "Daniel, it's so good to see you again." "And you're still as busy with work as ever, I bet," Daniel remarked with a knowing look. "Anyway, I'll be working here as a cardiologist soon, so you'd better get ready for me bothering you all the time." Elise smiled, feeling a genuine sense of comfort she hadn't experienced in a long time. Having Daniel back in her life might just be the distraction she desperately needed. Daniel's return was like a breath of fresh air in Elise's chaotic life. He wasn't just an old friend. He was a solid anchor while she was desperately trying to escape the shadow of Michael. His presence provided a sense of comfort and familiarity that she hadn't realized she needed until now. It didn't take Daniel long to notice the changes in Elise, the restless glances, the way she avoided eye contact whenever Michael's name came up. One evening, over a late dinner at a quiet restaurant, he finally confronted her. "Elise, what's going on with you? I've never seen you this tense before." Elise offered a forced smile, swirling the wine in her glass. "It's nothing, just work." Daniel studied her intently, his warm eyes filled with concern. "It's Michael Knight, isn't it?" Elise stiffened, nearly spilling her drink. "Why would you think that?" Daniel chuckled softly. "Elise, have you forgotten how well I know you? Every time I mention his name, you look away." Elise sighed, lowering her gaze. She didn't want to talk about Paris, but Daniel's gentle sincerity made it hard to keep things bottled up any longer. "It's complicated." Daniel nodded as if he understood more than she was willing to admit. "Whatever it is, Elise, I'm here for you. Always." From that moment on, Daniel started spending more time with Elise. He took her out for lunch whenever she had a free moment, picked her up after long shifts, and even walked with her through the city late at night when she struggled to sleep. His presence made Elise feel safe and at ease. But Michael Knight had not failed to notice. Michael couldn't ignore the changes in Elise. She smiled more often, and the tension that once flickered in her eyes every time she saw him had faded. The reason behind it was obvious. Daniel Collins. He was everywhere, at the hospital cafeteria, in the elevators, and even walking Elise out of the hospital after work. Every time Michael saw them together, an invisible wave of jealousy surged within him, but he maintained his usual composed exterior. One afternoon, as Elise stepped out of the surgical ward, Michael appeared in front of her, blocking her path with deliberate intent. "Dr. Carter, you seem to be quite busy these days with Dr. Collins?" His tone was light, but the sarcasm was unmistakable. Elise tightened her grip on the clipboard in her hands, determined not to show any sign of unease. "At least he's not an arrogant, selfish man like you." Michael's lips curled into a faint smirk, his eyes locked onto hers. "Perhaps, but I think you should be careful with men who seem too perfect, Elise." Elise arched an eyebrow, unfazed. "Thanks for the advice, but I know exactly what I'm doing." Michael stepped closer, his gaze penetrating, as if trying to read every thought in her mind. "Are you sure? Because I don't think you're the type to settle for something safe." Elise felt a surge of irritation flare inside her. Taking a deep breath, she replied sharply, "The issue is, I prefer people who respect boundaries, Michael." Her words were like a dagger to his pride. Michael's smirk remained, but his eyes darkened. "Boundaries?" he echoed slowly. "Funny, because that night, you didn't seem too concerned about boundaries." Elise's body tensed, her fingers trembling slightly as she clutched the clipboard. She had enough. "I don't have time to argue with you. Stay away from me." With that, she walked away swiftly, leaving Michael standing alone in the corridor, his gaze following her with unreadable emotions. Daniel was more than just a friend to Elise. He was a pillar of support. He never pressured her to open up about the past, yet he was always there whenever she needed him. One evening, as they sat together on a park bench under the soft glow of streetlights, Daniel gently asked, "Are you sure you're okay?" Elise offered a small smile, resting her head against his shoulder. "With you here, I feel okay." Daniel smiled and gently squeezed her hand. "Then let me help you forget what's not worth remembering." Elise knew Daniel was sincere, and she knew she could trust him. But deep down, she couldn't shake the uncertainty that gnawed at her heart. Because no matter how much Daniel was there, no matter how much she wanted to move on, there was still a part of her that couldn't stop thinking about Michael, the man she hated the most, yet the only one who had somehow managed to occupy a corner of her heart in a way she couldn't understand. And that terrified her more than anything. Elise's nausea had lasted for a week, and she couldn't ignore the unusual changes in her body any longer. As a doctor, she understood exactly what these symptoms meant, but deep down, she refused to acknowledge the truth. One morning, after another bout of violent sickness in the bathroom, Elise sat on the cold tiled floor, staring at the pregnancy test in her trembling hands. Two bold red lines stared back at her. "No, this can't be happening," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her hands shook uncontrollably. She had been so careful, so meticulous, but the evidence in front of her was undeniable. There was only one person who could be the father, Michael Knight. The thought of him sent a shiver down her spine, and she collapsed against the bathroom wall, overwhelmed by a wave of fear and confusion. Elise couldn't allow this to ruin her life. Michael could never know. Taking a deep breath, she whispered to herself, "It's going to be fine. I'll handle this. On my own." But things were never that simple. Ever since Daniel's return, Michael had been keeping an even closer eye on Elise. His sharp instincts immediately picked up on her unusual behavior, her exhaustion, the way she seemed lost in thought, and the subtle ways she avoided eye contact whenever he was near. One afternoon, while Elise sat in the hospital break room, staring absently at her untouched cup of tea, Michael appeared behind her, his deep voice breaking the silence. "Are you all right, doctor?" "Carter?" Elise jolted upright, her heart pounding as she turned to find him standing there, his amber eyes scrutinizing her every move. "I'm fine," she replied too quickly, forcing a calm tone. Michael stepped closer, folding his arms across his chest. You've been different lately. Something's wrong, isn't it? Elise avoided his gaze, taking a slow sip of water to mask her unease. It's just work, nothing more. But Michael wasn't easily fooled. His eyes narrowed, his voice dropping an octave. You forget that I'm very good at reading people, Elise. Her pulse quickened. She knew he was onto something, and if she didn't act fast, he would uncover the truth. Michael, I don't have anything to say to you. She cut him off abruptly and stood up, ready to leave. But Michael was quicker. He reached out, his hand wrapping around her wrist with just enough pressure to stop her without hurting her. His touch sent a jolt of warmth through her, but Elise quickly shut it out. You're hiding something, he said firmly, his gaze piercing into hers. And I have a feeling it involves me. Panic flared inside her, and before she could think, the words slipped from her lips. I'm pregnant. Michael's entire body went still, his grip on her wrist loosening as his eyes darkened with shock. The air between them grew heavy with tension. What did you just say? His voice was hoarse, laced with an emotion Elise couldn't quite decipher. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to hold his gaze. Elise knew she had to protect herself and her baby. She couldn't let Michael interfere, not when she believed he wasn't capable of being a father. So she lied. I'm pregnant with Daniel's child. The weight of the lie settled heavily in her chest the moment the words left her mouth. She could see it in Michael's face, the way his expression shifted from disbelief to something far darker, something wounded. His jaw clenched, his hands curling into fists at his sides. Daniels? He repeated, his voice devoid of emotion, but his eyes filled with turmoil. Elise nodded, her voice steady despite the turmoil raging inside her. Yes, Daniel and we got back together. A thick silence fell between them. Elise could almost hear the sound of Michael's breathing, the tension crackling in the air like an impending storm. Michael's lips curled into a bitter smile, but his eyes betrayed him. They were empty, hollow. Congratulations to both of you, he said coolly, his voice distant and detached. Elise's heart twisted painfully in her chest. She could see the subtle tightness in his jaw, the way he clenched his teeth in frustration, and for the first time, she realized how much her words had hurt him. Without another word, Michael turned on his heel and walked away, leaving Elise standing there, feeling as though she had just shattered something irreparable. As he disappeared down the hallway, Elise let out a shaky breath, pressing a trembling hand to her chest. She told herself it was the right thing to do. She had to keep him at a distance. But why did it feel like she had just made the biggest mistake of her life? Ever since Elise uttered that fateful lie, that the baby belonged to Daniel, Michael felt as if he had lost the most precious thing in his life. On the outside, he maintained his cold, composed demeanor, still exuding the same confidence and authority he was known for. But deep inside, everything was slowly crumbling. Sleepless nights, relentless thoughts. He couldn't escape the image of Elise, the woman he had always denied caring about, yet couldn't seem to forget. Every evening, in his luxurious London penthouse, Michael would sit on the leather couch, a glass of whiskey swirling in his hand, his eyes staring blankly at the vast cityscape through the towering windows. The golden glow of the streetlights illuminated the opulent streets below, but inside he felt nothing but emptiness. Has she really forgotten me? He murmured, his fingers tightening around the crystal glass. Images of Elise flashed through his mind like a haunting melody. Her defiant gaze during their heated meetings, her sharp yet emotional voice, and most vividly, the memory of that night in Paris. The night when all barriers had crumbled and they had lost themselves in an intoxicating whirlwind of passion. Michael closed his eyes, recalling the way her lips had melted into his, her breath mingling with his in the darkened room, and how she had fit so perfectly in his arms, as if she had always belonged there. But just hours later, she had disappeared, leaving behind nothing but an unbearable void. He had told himself time and time again that it was just a mistake, a fleeting moment of weakness. Yet deep down, he knew the truth. He had never truly let Elise go. To fill the growing emptiness inside him, Michael threw himself into work with an almost reckless obsession. Endless meetings, hospital expansion projects, and major business deals with global medical corporations, everything to keep himself occupied, to leave no room for thoughts of her. At board meetings, he remained the same formidable Michael Knight, calculating, ruthless, and unreadable. But when the office lights dimmed and he was left alone in the vast emptiness of his penthouse, the facade shattered, leaving him exposed to his own torment. On more than one occasion, he found himself staring at pictures from hospital events, scanning for Elise in the crowd. Her presence was undeniable, even in mere photographs. Her smile, her unwavering dedication, and the warmth she carried wherever she went. And then there were the ones where she stood beside Daniel, smiling in a way that sent a sharp pang through Michael's chest. Is she truly happy with him? He whispered bitterly, staring at the photo on his screen. The idea of Elise being with someone else, especially someone as seemingly perfect as Daniel, gnawed at him like a slow poison. He couldn't accept it, refused to believe that she had moved on so easily. Despite Elise's insistence that the baby was Daniel's, Michael's instincts told him otherwise. He knew Elise well enough to understand that she wasn't the type to compromise her principles so easily, nor was she someone who could fall for another man overnight. He recalled the fleeting moments of hesitation in her eyes, the nervous way she avoided his gaze whenever they crossed paths at the hospital. Every time he subtly brought up their night in Paris, he noticed how she stiffened, unable to completely mask the lingering emotions beneath her composed exterior. One late night, Michael sat alone in his office, his gaze fixed on his phone. He had considered calling her countless times, confronting her, demanding the truth, but his pride and the fear of hearing the worst always held him back. What if she truly doesn't need me? The question echoed in his mind, a cruel reminder of the vulnerability he despised in himself. Michael Knight wasn't a man accustomed to losing, yet here he was, feeling defeated by the very thing he had always rejected. Love. No one knew the deeper scars Michael carried. His fear of abandonment, the wounds of a childhood devoid of warmth. Growing up in a household where affection was an afterthought, Michael had learned early on to rely on no one, to trust only in himself. His mother, the only person he had ever clung to, had left when he was still a boy, leaving behind an unfillable void. From that moment on, he had built walls around his heart, convincing himself that love was a weakness he could never afford. But then came Elise. She had walked into his life with her fierce independence and unyielding spirit, challenging him in ways no one ever had. And now the thought of losing her to another man, to Daniel, was a reality he wasn't prepared to face. Every night as he lay in bed, he wondered, is Elise truly happy? Dreams of her haunted him, her radiant smile, her quiet strength, even the way she used to glare at him with such fierce determination. And when he woke up, reality crashed down on him. She wasn't his anymore. One particular night, unable to withstand the torment any longer, Michael poured himself a glass of scotch, but no amount of alcohol could drown the ache within him. He stared at his reflection in the mirror, his usually sharp, confident features marred by the tiredness in his eyes. I can't go on like this. And it was in that moment he made a decision. He needed the truth. He needed to confront Elise once and for all. If she had truly chosen Daniel, he would walk away. But if there was even the slightest chance left, he wouldn't let her go. Because no matter how many times he tried to deny it, his heart had never stopped longing for her. The night was silent in Elise's apartment, with only the steady ticking of the wall clock reminding her of the heavy moments passing by. She sat on her bed, her gaze fixed on the ultrasound picture lying on the bedside table. Her trembling fingers gently traced the blurry outlines of the tiny life growing inside her, and a tight knot formed in her chest. I'm sorry, my love. I just don't want you to grow up in a complicated relationship. Her whisper was hoarse, worn down by countless sleepless nights. Since the moment she lied to Michael, claiming the baby belonged to Daniel, an unrelenting guilt had clung to her, gnawing away at her every waking hour. Daniel had been by her side, kind, gentle, always trying to make her smile and help her through this difficult time. But Elise knew the truth deep in her heart. She did not truly belong to him. Every time Daniel looked at her with love-filled eyes, Elise felt like she was deceiving him in the cruelest way. He deserved someone who loved him wholeheartedly, not someone clinging to him as an escape from the truth. Elise looked up at her reflection in the large mirror across the room. Her face was gaunt, her eyes tired and empty. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt at peace. She had loved Michael, though she never wanted to admit it. But that love had no place in their lives. Michael was a billionaire, living in a world of wealth, power, and calculated precision. He would never belong to someone like her, an ordinary doctor struggling to keep up with life. And most of all, she believed that he hated her. His cold eyes and sharp words haunted her. "Did you really think you could fool me, Doctor Carter?" The memory of his words echoed in her mind, making her shiver every time she recalled the moment she had to face him. She couldn't read Michael's thoughts, but deep down, she knew he had never fully believed her. Placing a hand gently on her stomach, where the small life inside her was growing each day, Elise couldn't imagine what would happen if Michael found out the truth. Would he take the baby away from her? Would she be strong enough to protect her child from his world of schemes and power? The hospital offered no escape from their inevitable encounters, and every time she saw him, Elise felt as though he could see right through the barriers she had so carefully constructed. Whenever Michael appeared, her heart pounded in her chest, her palms grew sweaty, and she always found herself looking away. But Michael never took his eyes off her. "Dr. Carter, you look exhausted these days." His voice was deep, laced with unspoken meaning. Elise pressed her lips together, gripping the pen in her hand tightly, forcing herself to appear composed. "I'm fine, thank you." Michael said nothing more, but his gaze lingered on her face longer than necessary, as if he were searching for something she refused to reveal. She turned away, reminding herself to stay strong. She had made her choice, to lie and avoid him. But every time she saw him, an overwhelming longing welled up within her, one she couldn't suppress no matter how hard she tried. Despite Daniel's unwavering presence, his gentle care, his efforts to be there for her, Elise increasingly felt like she was living a lie. One evening, as Daniel brought her favorite chicken soup, he spoke softly, his voice filled with concern. "Elise, are you sure you don't want to talk to Michael?" Elise's hands froze mid-air, her eyes darting away. "Why would you ask that?" Daniel gave her a small, sad smile. "Because I can see you're not truly happy, and I don't want you to keep hurting yourself." Elise bit her lip, guilt weighing heavily in her chest. "Daniel, I don't want to talk about it." He nodded, but the disappointment in his eyes was something Elise couldn't ignore. He understood her more than she wanted to admit, and that only made her feel worse. At night, when the world quieted down, Elise was left alone with the weight of her thoughts. Lying in bed, she placed a hand over her stomach, feeling the faint movements of the little life inside. "You'll be okay, won't you?" she whispered, tears slipping down onto her pillow. But in her dreams, Michael always appeared. The way he looked at her in the hospital corridors, the sound of his voice, and the way he had once touched her with a gentleness she had never thought he was capable of. Elise knew she couldn't keep running forever. She could lie to the whole world, but she couldn't lie to herself. She loved Michael, and sooner or later the truth would come to light. No matter how much she feared it, Elise knew that some things couldn't stay hidden forever. And all she could do now was pray that, when that day arrived, Michael would find it in his heart to forgive her. The first few months of Elise's pregnancy passed in anxiety and tension. Despite being a doctor, when it came to her own body, she couldn't stop fear from creeping in. She buried herself in work to escape the reality, but her body couldn't keep up forever. The dizziness and nausea grew worse with each passing day. One afternoon, while examining a patient, Elise suddenly felt the world spinning around her. Before she could react, everything went black. She woke up in a hospital bed, with Daniel sitting beside her, his face full of worry. "Elise, you can't keep going like this," Daniel said, his voice firm. "You need to rest. The baby needs you to be healthy." Elise clenched the blanket tightly, her voice barely a whisper. "I know, but I don't want anyone's pity." Daniel sighed, his hand gently covering hers. "You don't have to face this alone. I'll always be here." Elise forced a small smile, but deep inside, she knew Daniel wasn't the person she truly needed. Every night, as she placed her hand over her stomach, She couldn't stop thinking about Michael, the man she had been avoiding all this time. Even though Daniel was always by her side, taking care of her and protecting her, Elise started to feel suffocated by his presence. Every act of kindness from Daniel only intensified her guilt. She knew he loved her, but she couldn't reciprocate those feelings. One evening, when Daniel brought her favorite chicken soup and encouraged her to eat, Elise couldn't hold back anymore. "Daniel, you don't have to do all this," she said softly but firmly. Daniel paused, looking directly into her eyes. The patience in his gaze gradually turned into sadness. "Elise, I know what you're thinking. You don't have to lie to me anymore." Elise bit her lip, her eyes welling up with tears she couldn't hold back. "I've tried. I've tried to be the person you need," Daniel continued, his voice trembling slightly. "But I can't replace him, can I?" Elise lowered her gaze, guilt washing over her. "Daniel, I'm sorry." Daniel nodded, a bittersweet smile on his lips. "You love Michael, don't you?" Elise didn't answer, but her silence said it all. Daniel knew he couldn't keep Elise by his side if her heart didn't belong to him, and more than anyone, he knew the truth about the baby. Elise couldn't keep lying to herself, and Daniel couldn't stand by and watch her struggle alone anymore. One afternoon, Daniel went to Michael's office at the hospital. Michael, sitting behind his desk, glanced at Daniel with a probing look. "How can I help you, Doctor? Collins?" Daniel took a deep breath before speaking plainly. "I'm here to tell you the truth about Elise." Michael leaned back in his chair, his expression cold but tinged with curiosity. "She told me the baby is yours, so what else is there to say?" Daniel clenched his fists, looking Michael straight in the eye. "The baby is yours, Michael." Michael froze, his amber eyes flickering with shock. "She only lied because she was scared, and because she hates you," Daniel continued, his voice calm but firm. Michael couldn't hide his surprise. The initial feeling of betrayal was quickly overshadowed by a rush of overwhelming relief. "What?" he repeated, as if unable to believe his ears. Daniel nodded. "Elise wasn't brave enough to face her feelings, but I can't let her go through this difficult pregnancy alone anymore." Michael shot up from his chair, determination burning in his eyes. "Where is she?" "She's at the hospital," Daniel replied. "She's been experiencing serious complications." Without hesitation, Michael grabbed his coat and strode out of the office with resolute steps. Daniel watched him go, a small, knowing smile forming on his lips. "Take good care of her, Michael." Michael couldn't remember the last time he felt this anxious. He had faced billion-dollar deals, high-stakes meetings with powerful stakeholders, and yet his heart had never been this out of control. But just the thought of Elise, the stubborn woman who drove him crazy, and the baby growing inside her, made him feel like his entire world was on the verge of collapsing. He strode down the hospital hallway, the sound of his expensive leather shoes echoing against the marble floor. His deep brown eyes darkened, holding a storm of emotions he had buried for so long. When he reached the door to Elise's hospital room, he suddenly stopped. Should he knock? Should he confront her, knowing she had denied his existence in the baby's life? "What the hell are you afraid of, Knight?" he muttered to himself before pushing the door open with resolve. Elise flinched when the door swung open. The familiar scent filled the room, and with just one glance, she knew exactly who it was. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst, but she forced her face to remain composed. "Michael," she whispered, her voice hoarse. He stood there, tall and imposing as always, but tonight, there was something different in his deep, penetrating gaze. Was it hurt? Anger? Or was it the pain of betrayal? She quickly turned her eyes toward the window, avoiding his gaze, but Michael wouldn't allow it. He stepped closer, slow but deliberate, each step crushing the fragile wall she had built around herself. "What are you doing here?" she asked, trying to sound strong, but her voice trembled involuntarily. Michael didn't respond right away. He stood in front of her, his eyes locked onto her pale face. The silence stretched between them, suffocating her. Finally, his voice broke the tension, deep and unwavering. "You lied to me, Elise." Elise bit her lip, feeling a sharp ache in her chest. What are you talking about? I don't understand." Michael tilted his head slightly, his sharp gaze cutting through her like a blade. Don't play games with me anymore. Daniel told me everything. Her body stiffened. It felt as if the ground beneath her feet had collapsed. Daniel, he told him? And the truth is, Michael leaned down, his amber eyes locking onto hers, his words hitting her like a sledgehammer. The baby is mine, isn't it? Elise's lips trembled, tears welling up in her eyes, but she stubbornly turned away. No. Michael gently took her hand, his voice softer, but no less resolute. Look me in the eyes and say that again, Elise. She trembled, her cold fingers clutching the white hospital sheet, her mind blank. She wanted to lie, to continue running away, but when she saw the raw vulnerability in his eyes, she couldn't do it anymore. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Yes, it's yours. Michael closed his eyes for a moment, as if trying to hold back the flood of emotions threatening to break free. When he opened them again, there was something in them Elise had never seen before. Tenderness. Slowly he knelt beside her bed, his large hand resting gently on her stomach. The warmth of his touch spread through her, and Elise could no longer hold back the tears, letting them fall freely down her cheeks. Why did you lie to me? Michael's voice was thick with emotion. Why did you push me away? Elise sobbed, her years of resilience crumbling in front of him. I was scared, Michael. I was afraid you'd see me and the baby as just a responsibility. I was afraid you wouldn't love us. Michael looked deeply into her eyes, conveying everything he couldn't put into words. He gently cupped her face, wiping away her tears with his thumb in an unexpectedly tender gesture. Elise, you don't understand. You're not just a responsibility, you're everything. Elise's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. I tried to forget you, tried to live without you, but do you know what happened? Michael's voice softened, filled with vulnerability. Every time I close my eyes, I see only you. Only you, Elise. She broke down completely, burying her face in his shoulder. Michael held her tightly, as if he feared that letting go would mean losing her forever. I'm sorry, Michael. I'm so sorry for pushing you away. He smiled faintly, his voice filled with warmth and love. We don't have to apologize anymore. From now on, I'm not letting you face this alone. Michael pulled a chair closer to Elise's hospital bed, his hands still tightly holding hers. He leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss on her forehead, his gaze filled with unwavering protection. Do you know what I regret the most? He asked softly. Elise looked up at him, her tear-filled eyes searching his. What? Leaving you alone for too long. His voice was a whisper, but his eyes were resolute. But now I'm going to make up for it. I'll be the best father for our child and the best man for you. Elise smiled through her tears, placing her hand over his resting on her belly. For the first time, she felt an absolute sense of security with him by her side. Are you sure, Michael? Can you really change for me and our baby? She asked, vulnerability flickering in her voice. Michael lowered his head, his lips brushing gently against hers. A kiss that held all the assurance she needed. More than anything, Elise, he murmured. In that moment, Elise knew she wouldn't have to fight alone anymore. She had Michael, and this time, he wouldn't let her go. The hospital room was heavy with an unbearable tension. Elise lay motionless on the bed, her face pale, and each labored breath felt like a knife to Michael's heart. She had been admitted 2 days ago due to dangerously high blood pressure, but this morning, things had taken a turn for the worse. Her condition is critical, the attending doctor said gravely. She's experiencing acute fetal distress. We need to perform an emergency surgery to save both the mother and the babies. Michael stood frozen, each word slicing through him like a blade. He gripped Elise's cold hand tightly, his heart hammering in his chest. For the first time in his life, Michael, a man who had always been in control, felt utterly powerless. I won't let you leave me, Elise. His voice was hoarse with emotion. You can't leave me and our babies. I need you. But Elise remained silent, her eyes closed, unaware of his desperate plea. The emergency surgery began immediately. Michael stood outside the operating room, his tense gaze fixed on the closed doors. Each passing minute felt like an eternity. his fists clenched tightly by his sides. His mind was flooded with memories of Elise, their heated arguments at the hospital, their stolen moments of tenderness in Paris, the way she had admitted her pregnancy with hesitation in her eyes. It all played in his head like an agonizing film, making his chest ache. "I never knew what fear was until you came into my life," he whispered, his eyes red from exhaustion and worry. Suddenly, the operating room doors swung open, and Daniel emerged, his face tense but carrying a flicker of hope. "The surgery is still ongoing, but we can save the babies," Daniel announced. Michael nodded, but his heart refused to settle. There was only one thing he wanted above all else: Elise's survival. She was everything to him. Inside the operating room, the medical team worked tirelessly. Elise's condition was more fragile than expected, her heartbeat faint and her vitals fluctuating dangerously. "The patient's blood pressure is dropping fast," the lead surgeon called out, his voice sharp with urgency. Elise, trapped in the haze of unconsciousness, felt as though she were floating between two worlds. An endless void stretched before her, dark, cold, and unfamiliar. Amidst the silence, she heard Michael's voice, deep and filled with desperation. "Elise, come back to me. You can't leave me." She wanted to return, to open her eyes and see his worried face, but something kept pulling her further away. "Elise, you have to fight." She could feel his love reaching for her, and with one final surge of strength, she willed herself back to reality. Outside the operating room, Michael watched as the heart rate monitor beeped steadily again. A tear slid down his cheek, and he whispered in relief, "Thank you for not leaving me." After hours of tense surgery, the sound of two newborn cries echoed through the operating room, shattering the heavy silence. The twin girls had arrived safely and in good health. Daniel emerged from the operating room, a rare smile appearing on his usually serious face. "Congratulations, Michael. Both babies are safe." Michael stood frozen, his heart exploding with overwhelming joy. As the nurses carried the tiny infants out of the room, his eyes were fixated on them. These little lives were a part of him and Elise, the most precious gift life had ever given him. Gently, he reached out and took the first baby girl into his arms. Her tiny body fit perfectly against his strong embrace, and the feeling was nothing short of magical. "Hello, my little angel," he whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. Looking down at the sleeping infant, her delicate fingers curled around his finger, and tears welled up in his eyes. "I'm sorry I wasn't there for you and your mother sooner, but I'll never leave you again." In that moment, Michael realized that it was not wealth or power that defined his life, but family, the one thing that truly mattered. When Elise woke up, the soft morning light streamed through the curtains, and the first thing she saw was Michael sitting beside her, cradling their two babies in his arms. She stirred slightly, her sapphire eyes widening at the sight before her. Michael looked up, his amber eyes filled with an indescribable happiness. "Elise, you're awake." His voice was hoarse with emotion. Elise struggled to speak. "Our babies." Michael smiled and gently placed one of the babies into her arms. "They're both healthy. You did amazing, Elise." Tears streamed down Elise's face as she gazed at the tiny life in her arms. She turned to Michael, her eyes overflowing with emotion. "I thought I'd never get to see you and our children again." Michael took her hand in his voice a soothing balm to her soul. "I told you, I won't leave you alone anymore." Elise smiled through her tears, feeling the warmth of his promise in his touch, in the sincerity of his gaze. "Thank you, Michael, for being here." Michael leaned down and kissed her forehead gently, his voice thick with emotion. "I love you, Elise." A quiet sob escaped her lips as she clutched his hand tighter. For the first time in months, she felt truly loved, truly safe. In the days that followed, Elise's recovery was quicker than expected. Michael never left her side, caring for her and their daughters with a devotion she had never seen in him before. Their tiny miracles had brought them back together, teaching them to appreciate the true meaning of love and family. As Michael watched Elise holding their two daughters, he knew he had finally found the purpose he had been searching for his entire life. "We'll build a happy family together, Elise." Elise smiled, tears of happiness glistening in her eyes. I believe in you, Michael. This time she wasn't afraid anymore. She knew Michael would never let go of her hand again. The hospital room was bathed in the gentle morning light, the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor creating a soothing melody. Elise slowly opened her eyes, but instead of pain or exhaustion, the first thing she felt was an overwhelming sense of warmth. Before her, Michael was kneeling beside the hospital bed, his amber eyes filled with love and a silent plea. His usually immaculate suit was wrinkled, his tousled hair slightly disheveled, but Elise had never seen him look so real, so vulnerable. Elise! His voice was deep and soft, filled with raw emotion. She blinked, surprised to see him on one knee, holding a small black velvet box in his hands. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she couldn't tear her gaze away from him. "What are you doing?" she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Michael let out a small chuckle, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm doing what I should have done a long time ago." He opened the box, revealing a dazzling yet elegantly simple diamond ring that sparkled in the morning light, just like his eyes brimming with love and sincerity. "Elise," he began, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. "I made mistakes. I let my pride and fears push you away. But after knowing you're the mother of my children, I've realized nothing matters more than you and our family." Elise sat frozen, tears welling up in her eyes. His words touched the deepest corners of her heart, and she could feel every beat of her heart aligning with his. Michael reached for her hand, holding it gently but firmly, as if to assure her that this time he would never let go. "I've lived in solitude, believing that love was just an illusion, but you changed all that, Elise. You are the light in my life. Please let me make things right. Let me be the man who stands beside you forever. Will you marry me, Elise?" Elise gazed into his eyes, the same eyes she had once thought were cold and distant, now so warm and earnest. She could feel her heartbeat quicken, every fiber of her being screaming for her to say yes. Taking a deep breath, she smiled through her tears and squeezed his hand tighter. "Michael, I used to hate you. I wanted to run as far away from you as I could." She paused, then looked straight into his eyes. "But you've shown me that you're not just a proud, stubborn man. You're someone I can trust, someone I can rely on." Michael held his breath, waiting, hope flickering in his eyes. Elise's lips trembled as she whispered the words that would change everything. "Yes, I will marry you." At that moment, Michael felt like the entire world had burst into color. A radiant smile spread across his face as he stood up, gently slipping the ring onto her delicate finger. "Thank you, Elise," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Elise laughed softly, tears of happiness trailing down her cheeks. "Thank you for never giving up on me." Michael leaned in, pressing a tender kiss to her forehead, his embrace firm and full of promise. "I swear, I'll never let you down." 1 year later, Elise and Michael's suburban home basked in the gentle summer sunlight. A soft breeze rustled through the lush green garden, where their twin daughters, Ava and Lily, played with pure, infectious laughter that echoed through the warm space. Michael stood on the porch, his gaze filled with tenderness as he watched his two little angels. He crossed his arms, a soft smile tugging at his lips. A smile no one would have ever imagined on the once cold and prideful CEO. Gone was the man consumed by work and numbers. In his place stood a devoted father, willing to sacrifice everything for his precious family. From the kitchen, Elise emerged with a tray of freshly baked cookies, their sweet aroma drifting through the yard. She leaned against the door frame, watching Michael with eyes full of love. "I never thought I'd see you in an apron. Baking cookies," Michael teased, stepping closer and wrapping his arms around her from behind. Elise chuckled, resting her head against his chest. "Neither did I, but I suppose motherhood changes a lot of things." He pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, his voice filled with warmth. "And I've never seen you more beautiful than you are now." Elise smiled softly, her eyes drifting toward the garden, where Ava was chasing Lily, their giggles filling the air. The life they had now was more fulfilling than she had ever dreamed. A year ago, if someone had told Michael Knight he'd be waking up at 3 in the morning to make bottles or change diapers, they would have been laughed at. Yet here he was, the first to rise each morning, tending to his daughters with surprising ease. He spent his mornings strolling through the park with Elise and the twins, learned how to change diapers without making them cry, and even mastered bedtime stories, though it took some practice. One night, with Elise working the late shift, Michael spent nearly 2 hours trying to soothe Ava, who refused to sleep. She cried and fussed, nearly driving him to frustration. But when she finally nestled against his chest and drifted off, Michael simply held her close, feeling an overwhelming sense of love and fulfillment. "You're turning into quite the amazing dad," Elise teased the next morning when she found him asleep on the couch with Ava in his arms. Michael smiled, brushing a stray lock of hair from their daughter's forehead. "As long as you and the girls are happy, I'd do anything." Elise looked at him with gratitude, knowing how far they had come. Despite the hardships, Michael had stood by her, not just as a husband, but as an exceptional father. One afternoon, as Elise returned home from work, she found Michael sitting on the grass with Ava and Lily, reading them a fairy tale in his deep, soothing voice. The twins listened intently, occasionally giggling in delight. Elise stood still, her heart swelling with love. This was the life she had always dreamed of, a peaceful home, a loving husband, and their beautiful children. She walked over, sat beside Michael, and leaned her head on his shoulder. "You know," she murmured, "there was a time when I thought we'd never have moments like these." Michael smiled, pulling her closer. "And now?" Elise let out a soft laugh, her eyes shining with happiness. "Now I know that the best things in life often come from the most unexpected places." Michael kissed the top of her head, his voice filled with sincerity. "And I know that true love can overcome any obstacle." They sat in comfortable silence, soaking in the warmth of the moment. All the misunderstandings and heartaches of the past had melted away, leaving only love and peace. In the background, Ava and Lily's laughter rang through the air as they ran and played in the golden afternoon light, carrying with them the promise of a bright, beautiful future. Their story closed with a perfect ending, proof that true love could weather any storm, and that sometimes the most wonderful things in life arrive when we least expect them. Thank you for following our story. Did this story touch your heart? Leave a comment below. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel.